Ogham is a unique and ingenious writing system among the writing systems of the world. It's unique for two reasons. On the one hand, it's like a barcode. It consists of sequences of strokes or notches along a stem line of an object. Secondly, it was created as a three-dimensional writing system, not like the two-dimensional writing systems that we use ourselves. The Ogham script was probably invented in the 4th century AD. We are not completely sure about the time and also not completely sure about the place. It's certainly in an Irish context, perhaps in the Irish colonies in Britain, but most likely probably in the south of Ireland somewhere. The Ogham script is usually found on large stones, that is, large stone pillars, and it's usually written from bottom left, going upwards and then across the top and then down to the bottom again. The actual letters of the Ogham script consist of strokes or sometimes notches along the stem line. And the stem line is usually the edge of a stone. And if you, for instance, make a single stroke to the right of the stem line, that's the letter B. Or if you make two strokes along on the right side of the stem line, that's L, or three, that's V, and later F, etc., etc., etc. However, even though the script looks so different from what we are used as a writing system, it's actually clear that there is a knowledge of Latin writing that lies behind it. And whoever invented the script did it on the basis of the Latin writing system. That's clear on the one hand from the very fact that Ogham is an alphabetic script. At the same time, Ogham is not simply a cipher of Latin into strokes and notches, but there was a real phonological analysis done by whoever invented the script, so that the letters match the Irish language of the time, which we call Primitive Irish, very, very closely. The language for which the Ogham script was originally designed, probably in the 4th century AD, is a very early form of Gaelic, shortly before the historic period. We call that stage of the language Primitive Irish. Primitive in this name doesn't carry any kind of value judgment in the sense that the language would be simple or underdeveloped. It's just our technical term for a very early form of Gaelic. And in fact, Primitive Irish is the direct ancestor of all the modern Gaelic languages in these islands, of Irish in Ireland, of Scottish Gaelic in Scotland, and of Manx in the Isle of Man. And in this way, it is a shared part of the heritage, of the common heritage of these countries. Today, we know roughly around 530 Ogham inscriptions on objects, mostly Oghams on stones, but occasionally about 24 Oghams also on small portable objects like knives, knife handles, or small plates or plaquettes. The majority of the inscriptions, about 400, are known from Ireland, and in Ireland they are specifically found along the south coast, that is County Kerry, County Cork, County Waterford. But there are other important clusters of Ogham inscriptions in Britain, namely specifically in Wales and in Scotland, and on the Isle of Man.
The oldest surviving examples of Ogham date from about the 4th century, so the script is maybe a generation or two older than that. So it's something that was invented in the late Roman period. The majority of the examples that survive today are Ogham pillars, like the ones we're recording and making 3D models of, and those date mostly from the 5th, 6th and the early 7th century. After the 7th century, Ogham went out of fashion as a monumental script, and instead people used the Latin alphabet, the Roman alphabet, to write Irish. But Ogham was still known, and we have a smaller number of examples from the 8th and 9th century on portable objects, and that gives a good indication that ordinary people still had some knowledge of the script. The texts that are recorded in the Ogham alphabet on Ogham pillars are the earliest surviving evidence that we have of the Irish language. So they're hugely important to anyone who's trying to understand the history of the development of the language of Irish and in fact of the Celtic language family altogether. They're also very interesting for historical reasons. This is a period of great change in Irish society as the Roman Empire collapses, new political structures are being created, the new religion of Christianity is coming in, and all this is part of the great changes, social and cultural changes that are happening in Ireland. The Ogham that has survived are the ones that were carved on big lumps of stone. Ogham on organic materials and on portable objects is much less likely to survive archaeologically. But these other finds are very important because they give us a hint at this much wider range of uses that the script was used for. Ogham pillars are probably burial monuments that were put up not in churchyards. Many of these monuments date to before churchyard burial had become established, but these were family burial grounds which were often at the boundaries of family land, and the ancestors were sort of protecting the boundaries for the family. And the pillars went up not necessarily marking individual graves, but marking the burial ground as belonging to a particular family. And that's why the inscriptions name not just the person, but also the father or the kin group to which they belong, because it's about the power of the dynasty. And we have these texts that record, most of the people recorded are lost to history, but there's one or two individuals and one or two dynasties who do survive into the later historical records. So they're very important from a historical purpose as well. The project is a collaboration between the University of Glasgow and the University of Maynooth. It's funded jointly by the Irish Research Council and the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Council, and it runs for 3 years. And our aim is to bring a range of digital technologies and techniques to bear on understanding, improving our understanding of all things Ogham. So all kinds of inscriptions, manuscripts, all kinds of things written in the Ogham script. One of the main aims of the project is to create an online database of all examples of the Ogham script in Ireland and in Britain, and that's a total of over 600 different items, mostly stone monuments like this one, but also portable objects and some examples written in the margins of manuscripts. And we're going to be adding our 3D models to this database so that they're open for anybody to study, whether their interest is archaeological or linguistic, or whether they're from a local area and would like to find out more about the Ogham where they are.
It is actually here at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies that the idea to use 3D technology for recording Ogham inscriptions on stone in Ireland began. It was first suggested by Professor Werner Nahm. He was then director of the School of Theoretical Physics, and he had seen this technology used for other scripts and languages worldwide and suggested that we do the same here for Ogham inscriptions on stone. So the National Monument Service, the senior archaeologist there, gave us a list of Ogham stones in state care with preservation orders with the intent to prioritise these Ogham stones, their recording in Ireland. We got some media attention at the time. For example, TG Cahir broadcast a news item about the project.
Mar a Harlaíonn tar survéad a chuimseach a dhéanamh chlocha Ogham sa chunta é láthar na huaire. Institute Ardlainn Bleaclia agus Clár Discovery I gcóir leanna chéile. Túnscnamh 3D a dhéanann mionscanáil ar na clocha.
So Gary, I think it's actually on the opposite side here, so the front.
And we're here at Gartree in County Antrim on the shores of Lough Neagh to record an Ogham pillar for the Ogham project. Here's the pillar. About 300 years ago, it was reused as a gate post, and you can see the holes and in fact one of the iron prongs of the gate, and it's been cut down probably at that time to suit the shape of the gate post. And you can see here as well, it's been painted, the poor thing. There's been some whitewash up here and some tar paint down the bottom which is flaking off, but underneath you can see the remains of the inscription. Now, Ogham inscriptions of this kind go up the edge. Ogham's unique in being a 3D script written on the two sides, and they usually read vertically. On the face of it, it looks like it reads up like that, although it's always possible that when it was reused as a gatepost that it got flipped. So that's something that we'll need to check once we've made the model and can study it a bit better. So the strokes are made up of bundles of between 1 and 5 strokes. So they're either on this side, on that side, on both sides across, or just on the edge. And the ones that are just the little notches on the edge, that's for the vowels. So it's very easy to tell which are the consonants and which are the vowels, and that makes it easier to read. The problem for us, though, is that the edge of the stone is very vulnerable to damage, and so often the vowels get worn away. So again, that's something that we'll need to look at when we have the model and can understand it a bit better. Although most of the surviving Oghams are on stone, the shape of the script itself suggests that it was probably created to be used for carving on sticks. And in fact, it's very easy to quickly carve a short inscription. I'll just show you. The shape of the script suggests that it was probably invented to be carved on little wooden sticks like this. Carve off the bark, give yourself a little edge to carve on, and then the letter strokes are either side of this sort of central ridge, if you like. So I've done an N there, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then an E. Now I'm doing a T, so that's 3 strokes together. I want to do another T. I'm going to leave a slight space so you can tell it's 2 3s and not 1 6. That would be a bit confusing. And then a netta. That's the first half of a name that's very common, or a form of name that's very common, and is the text that's carved on the stone that we're recording today in the Ulster Museum.
So what I'm doing here today is I am 3D recording this Ogham stone here, and I'm using photogrammetry. So that involves taking lots and lots of photographs. So I've probably taken about 350 photographs of this stone today from all different angles. And as you put those photographs through the software, it will look for features that each of those photos have in common, and it will derive the geometry from that. 3D models can be used for a lot of different things. Like, you can take the color off, which is actually quite useful. It turns out that color is actually quite distracting in the field, and you don't get to look at that geometry underneath. So you can understand the carvings a lot better. And you can use them for a lot of different analyses that you can't do out in the field. So you can take a stone that is in Ireland and compare it to one that is in Scotland side by side without having to move it at all.
So one of the uses of the 3D data is that you can actually use it to 3D print miniature replicas of the stones. And this is one that we actually printed in the school. We got a 3D printer, and I use these 3D models for giving talks in schools, and it makes it much easier for children and for everybody to see the actual inscription and the way it wraps around the edge of the stone.
In its grammatical structure, primitive Irish was very similar to other ancient Celtic languages, such as Gaulish or Celtiberian. It still had endings on the words, which indicated the case forms. And in a way, you could say that it was very similar. It looked very like Latin and functioned very much like Latin. But in the 5th and 6th centuries AD, something dramatic happened to the language. The language shifted and changed drastically and rapidly within those 2 centuries. And at the end, we basically end up with an early form of Old Irish. So even though Old Irish derives directly from primitive Irish, which is just 2 centuries earlier, structurally it is a very different language. And on the Ogham stones, we can actually see those changes evolving almost before our very eyes. Occasionally we find the same name across several stones, illustrating actually the various evolutions of the name. So there's this very nice example where we have a name which can be reconstructed as Proto-Celtic Luchudikos, which probably means something like the one pointing out the god Lugh. We start out with Luchudikos in Proto-Celtic, and ultimately we end up in Old Irish with Luchdech. Now the cool thing is that we actually have the various stages in between. So we have Luchudechas, Luchudecha, Luchudech, Luchuduch, until we finally get to Old Irish Luchdech. This name is in fact still being used today in Ireland, and it's nowadays pronounced as Louis. Those sound changes happened in a very tightly staggered sequence, one after another. So the stones or the inscriptions on the stones allow us or to give us insights into how these changes actually played out in real life in the language. And at the same time, the order of the sound changes allows us to put the stones in a relative chronology, because otherwise it would really be very difficult to put a date on them at all.
So Ogham script doesn't just survive on stone monuments. We also have many examples of the writing system in manuscript sources dating from as early as the 9th century all the way up to the modern period. And one of the earliest examples of so-called manuscript Ogham is found in an early 9th century mass book known as the Stow Missal, which mainly consists of Latin texts, but also includes some material written in Old Irish. And at the end of a page containing excerpt from the Gospel of John, the scribe has written a brief note in Latin within which he signed his name in Ogham script. And the Stow Missal signature, Ogham signature, also illustrates how the original script system, as it was designed for stone monuments, was adapted to suit the format of the manuscript page. So instead of being written and read vertically, as it would have been on many stone monuments, the characters of the script have been arranged along a horizontal stem line and can be read from left to right. And we also tend to see an expanded number of letter symbols in manuscript Ogham as well. So another context in which we see Ogham scripts appear in some of the earlier manuscript sources is within discussions of Latin and Irish grammar or foreign alphabets. And we can see an example of that here in this manuscript known as the Book of Ballymote, which is a large compendium of learning in the Irish vernacular compiled around the late 14th century. And here we see the commentary to a grammar of the Irish language, where the scribe has written out the symbols of the Hebrew, Greek, and Roman alphabets side by side, followed by an explanation of the origins of the Ogham alphabet and an illustration of that script at the top of the next page. The text that's placed immediately before this Irish grammar in the Book of Ballymote is probably one of the most visually striking examples of manuscript Ogham, and seems to have been the starting point for a long-standing association between the script and ideas about cryptography and secret writing. And this tract is known as the Book of Ogham and consists of over 100 different variations of the standard Ogham alphabet, most of which involve either changing the appearance or position of the letter symbols or other kinds of cryptic devices like substituting or rearranging letters from their normal sequence. We sometimes find manuscript Ogham in rather unexpected places, such as this early 16th century compilation of medical learning written by an Irish doctor from North Connacht. And the text you see here is an Irish translation of fairly standard Latin teaching on uroscopy, the diagnosis of illness through examination of urine, but the scribe has occasionally switched from Roman to Ogham script in the middle of a line, and sometimes even in the middle of a word. And there doesn't seem to be any particular cryptic intent behind this practice here, and it's possible that this medical scribe was simply script switching for amusement or distraction while copying what he might have considered to be some kind of tedious or technical material. The Ogham script, as well as various ciphers derived from it, continued to be used and discussed in manuscripts of the modern period, mostly in the context of work by antiquarians who sought to explore and document not only the survival of stone monuments with Ogham inscriptions, but also the use of the script in medieval written sources. And here you can see one of the notebooks which belonged to the Cork antiquarian John Windell, who had a particular interest in Ogham. He included many sketches of Ogham stones that he viewed during his travels throughout Munster, and he also copied pages on Ogham from sources like the Book of Ballymote. And later sources like this point to the long-standing interest shown by scholars of the modern period in preserving this important aspect of Irish heritage.
Ogham never died out as a writing system, but it was always remembered and passed on. Therefore, unlike other ancient writing systems, it never had to be deciphered by modern researchers. And even in the modern period, even today, it is still being used for ornamental purposes or for art installations. We hope that the Ogham project creates new interest in the Ogham script and that it keeps a tradition alive that has been important for this island for more than 1,500 years.